everybody, it's Rachel with another video for you. I just got back from a wonderful trip in Switzerland and France last week. I personally love France. It's one of my favorite countries in all of Europe. And it got me thinking that although I've been traveling solo to Europe for quite a while now, for a lot of first timers, it can be a little overwhelming planning that first solo trip. So I want to help you. I've been all over Europe. I've been to Spain, Portugal, Italy, and I'm kind of used to the planning process by now. So if it's your first time traveling alone to Europe, stay tuned because I'm going to break down exactly how I plan my own solo trips. The first thing you need to do is create a reasonable itinerary. I know that on social media it may seem like everybody is traveling indefinitely, but let's be honest, that's not the reality for most of us. It's certainly not the reality for me either. I'm actually a full time high school teacher, and to travel with unlimited paid time off just isn't in the cards for me. And that's the case for pretty much everybody, right? So, when you're planning your itinerary to Europe, you want to make sure that you maximize your time in each place and aren't just rushing from destination to destination because you haven't paid all this money to experience these incredible places to just like sit in a train or a bus all day. Like, what's the fun in that? Pacing with my itineraries, I like avoiding two different things. One of those being one night stays in a city. I always find those one nights in a hotel really rushed because you're unpacking, you're packing again. And for me personally, it's kind of hectic to do. So when you're building your itinerary to go to Europe, aim to spend at least 2 nights in each place just because that slower pace will be a little less hectic because honestly, checking in and out of hotels can take quite a bit of time. And if you're limited with the amount of time that you have in Europe, you really don't want to be wasting your time packing and repacking. Another thing that I avoid are travel days that are longer than 3 hours. It just isn't for me. And with the public transportation in certain European countries, such as the Netherlands, for example, Germany, France, you really don't need to do that because the public transportation is so good. I don't mind connecting in train stations at all, but when it comes to getting a train and then a bus and then another train and that time adds up to more than 3 hours, I start to feel as if I'm paying to just be on the public transportation system, and I don't like doing that. So always check that travel time in advance. Two sites that I use for that are Rome to Rio. It breaks down the transportation time very clearly for you, as well as Google Maps. I'm not a big fan of Google, just as a side note, but Google Maps is really helpful for putting together the trip. Please don't shut down my account, Google. But yeah, so Google Maps or Rome to Rio are really helpful when it comes to planning out those travel days. And they're both really reliable, but as always, double check in advance to make sure there are no strikes going on. Strikes can definitely throw you through a loop. I remember years ago, I was on a solo trip in Portugal and there all the trains were on strike, and so many people at my hostel in Lisbon really wanted to go to Sintra to see the castles, but they weren't able to. So just make sure that you are looking ahead just to make sure there's no strikes going on. But otherwise, if it all looks good, Rome to Rio and Google Maps are excellent ways to plan your trip. My next tip has to do with your physical safety as well as your financial safety. When you travel alone to Europe, make sure that you purchase travel insurance ahead of time. I know that we have this idea in our head, especially as Americans, that Europe, at least most of the countries, have universal health care, but that only applies to citizens of that country. It does not apply to tourists coming through on a trip. And if you end up in the hospital for whatever reason, you will have to pay out of pocket for your treatment. So that is where travel insurance comes in. There are a lot of options available. In the past, I've used World Nomads to cover me, and it's always been very super easy to buy and pick the countries and dates and all that. And World Nomads has a pretty good policy too, in the sense that you have two options. You have the regular travel insurance as well as adventure travel insurance, which is good if you're going on like these crazy hikes or if you're going paragliding or something like that. If you have an injury from extreme sports, adventure insurance will cover you. In addition, if you have any travel credit cards, such as Chase Sapphire Preferred or the Reserve, they do also come with travel insurance. But I find with credit cards, a lot of the times their travel insurance just has to do with monetary losses. So if your flight is delayed or canceled, Chase will cover you. But in the case of medical travel insurance, they won't. So if you do have a travel credit card, always read the fine print before you go. So let's move away from safety for a second and talk about another aspect of solo travel to Europe that especially first timers worry about is loneliness. You may be flying from 7 hours away, 8 hours away, 10 hours away, maybe even 24 hours away if you're coming from Australia, and it can be a little overwhelming not knowing anyone in any of these cities, whether it's a big city like London or if it's a smaller, like cute town like Colmar in France. You don't know anybody, so that can be very overwhelming, and loneliness is such a massive concern. So my advice is, first and foremost, ask your friends, post on Facebook, post on Instagram, and see if anybody knows anyone else in these cities that you're visiting who would be maybe willing to show you around. So that's one way that you can make connections before you even land in Europe. Another thing that you can do is join online communities in advance. Me personally, I'm part of a group called Wonderful, which is geared towards solo female travelers. And in Wonderful, there are subgroups for individual cities, so we can meet up and hang out if our schedules align, and it's a lot of fun. So that's like another possibility, is to seek out these online communities and see if you can make connections in advance, because I know that might make people feel a little better. Another thing that you can do is with your accommodation, you can opt to stay in hostels instead of hotels. A lot of the times, a social hostel will have activities for other travelers to meet, and a lot of people who stay in hostels are traveling alone, so it is easier to make those connections. I've stayed in hostels that have free walking tours, that have group dinners at night, that have pub crawls, that have day trips to nearby cities, and those can be a ton of fun. Just make sure that you read reviews in advance, because I'm not gonna give my age, but I'm kind of getting a little old, so some hostels, they do have an age limit. So in my case, I definitely have to look at those reviews in advance, because if I don't, I could be in for a surprise. So if you're of a certain age, a lot of hostels, they do welcome everyone, but others, they do have that age limitation. So just make sure to check the website in advance before you go. So, speaking of other people, once your itinerary is finalized and ready to go, make sure that you send a copy to friends or family. I know, you're a badass solo traveler, you're amazing, you're seeing the world, but regardless, it's important that somebody at home does have that itinerary, because God forbid if there's an emergency, they will be able to track you down and know where you last were, as opposed to just falling off the grid. And, this doesn't mean that you can't be a little flexible too. Like, let's say you fall in love with Paris or fall in love with Amsterdam and you want to stay a couple more days. You certainly can do that. Just make sure that you reach out to your contact at home and let them know where it is that you're staying. Another thing that you can do, in addition to sharing your itinerary with somebody that you know, is to share your travel plans with something called the STEP program. Now, the STEP program, or Smart Traveler Enrollment Program, I believe it's called, is just limited to US citizens, but you basically share your travel dates with the State Department, so the embassy knows of your plans, and if there's an emergency you should be aware of, they will contact you. And I've had this happen to me. One time I was traveling solo in Estonia, and the State Department texted me to let me know there was a bomb scare at the airport. I wasn't at the airport or anything, but it was still good to know that it works. So if you're nervous about traveling alone and just want to have that little extra bit of protection, so to speak, you can enroll in the STEP program in addition to sharing everything with friends and family. Another really important tip for first timers traveling alone to Europe is, remember that this is your trip to Europe. If you don't want to see the Eiffel Tower, you don't have to. If you don't want to go to Big Ben, you don't have to. If you're really not a city person at all and you don't want to go to Madrid or Barcelona or Amsterdam and would rather go to the Swiss Alps and hike, do that. Like, it's entirely up to you. So I always like to say to people, I understand checking in advance for how much tickets would be, how much accommodation would be, but if your heart really isn't set on a certain destination, then don't do it, because you'll be resentful. You may not have as much fun as you should have otherwise. So go for those big bucket list items that you want to do. And it's going to look different for everybody. I know for me, for example, I love food. Obviously, I love food. And I also really love shopping. So when I was in Geneva recently, I absolutely loved it because of all the really fancy shops. I had a good time looking in all the windows and admiring the high fashion. But I know that's not for everybody. So go with what your heart wants. Don't worry about what you should be doing, because this is nobody else's trip but yours. So live your truth and book whatever destination that you want. With that being said, though, definitely consider the weather when you're there for sure. For example, I'm a huge fan of Spain. I absolutely adore everything about Spain. The last trip I took to Granada and Seville and Cordoba, it was just absolutely amazing. But I wouldn't do that trip in the middle of August, just because even for me, it's just way too hot. So always consider like that type of thing, like the time of year. But otherwise, just live your truth. And if you don't want to do like the huge tourist attractions like the Eiffel Tower, you really don't have to. It's entirely up to you, and don't feel guilty about it either. On the flip side, if there's something you really don't feel comfortable with, let's say if you are not a mountain hiker, then don't do that on your solo trip. I know sometimes, especially if you're staying in a hostel, you want to be cool and fit in with the people around you. But at the end of the day, like 9 times out of 10, you'll never see these people ever again. So don't feel pressured to do something that you don't want to do. If you need specific suggestions for where to go as a first time solo traveler to Europe, definitely check out that blog post that I talked about. I have a whole list of some of my favorite places to go as a solo traveler, but I will say that some destinations are easier than others. So if you are brand new to solo travel, which I assume you are, look into destinations such as Iceland that are really super duper safe, very low crime rate, but also has like great tourist infrastructure and beautiful like nature and a ton of group activities. So you can build your confidence that way. And then when you're feeling a bit more confident, go on to destinations that are a little more challenging. But really, overall, everywhere I've been in Europe has been fantastic for solo travel. I haven't run into any issues yet. So no matter where you want to go, I bet it's going to be awesome. So that'll do it for me today. I have a lot of cleaning to do. The school year's starting, things are busy, so I'm gonna peace out. But definitely check out my blog post with more information about where to go in Europe, and feel free to share your travel aspirations with me. Like, even though I'm not going anywhere for the time being, I'm obsessed with hearing about other people's trips, and I'm really excited for you. So definitely share where it is you want to go solo in Europe, and have a good time, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys, see you later, have a good one.